passion, glory, and despair. If you're looking for a summary of the game Italians call calcio, look no further than football club Internazionale Milano. Commonly known as simply Inter, the blue and black stripes of one of the fashion capitals of the world have often been far from the elegance you see in their clothing counterparts. But with one of the biggest and most intense fan bases across the globe, the Nerazzurri have also so often matched the quality of their iconic Curva Nord with quality on the pitch. Legends have come and gone, including but not limited to the likes of Luis Suarez, Ronaldo, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Vieri, Altobelli, Miazza, Mateus, Zenga, and of course, I can't forget to mention some of Inter's most iconic managers who were in charge of these players. Trapattoni, Simone and Marini all brought international glory to the Nerazzurri. However, the legendary Helenio Herrera was the only man to guide Inter to the Champions League title, with 2 victories in the 60s when the competition was still known as the European Cup. For years, Interisti were watching their city rivals lift the biggest accolade in club football, while they were sat at home dreaming. Well, that was until the 3rd of June 2008. This is the story of how Jose Mourinho won Inter the treble. If we rewind to the start of the 2007-08 season, with Roberto Mancini at the helm, Inter Milan had just won the title back-to-back, and for the first time on the pitch since 1989, with their triumph the season prior being down to the infamous Calciopoli scandal, in which Inter would be given the title despite having originally finished 3rd. However, you'd be surprised to hear that Inter left what was a record-breaking 97-point season with a sour taste in their mouth, as they were forced to watch AC Milan lift their 7th Champions League, having made their 3rd final in 5 years, with their number of triumphs in the competition having now reached over 3 times higher than Inter's. And so, going into the 07-08 campaign, Mancini was given one task by President Massimo Moratti: bring the iconic big ears back to the blue half of Milan. Mancini's side would fail to impress at first in Europe though, losing their first game 1-0 to Fenerbahce and leaving them with catching up to do if they wanted to top their group. In their next game, they would be left with just 9 players on the pitch after 2 second-half red cards saw them at a severe numerical disadvantage to an impressive PSV side. However, talisman Zlatan Ibrahimovic had managed to score 2 first-half goals to give them the win. It seemed this win helped set the tone for their season, as following it they would win the remaining 4 Champions League group games and would see a 28-game unbeaten streak in all competitions, before their last 16 clash, where they'd be unlucky enough to face the most successful side in English football history, Liverpool. The Reds had finished 2nd in their group, after being winless and bottom of the standings 3 games into the qualification stage, losing to a Besiktas side who would only manage a 3rd place finish in the Turkish league the same season. But then something clicked for the Reds. They would go on to win their remaining 3 group stage fixtures, scoring a remarkable 16 goals and conceding just once. The first leg would be played at Anfield, giving Liverpool the slight advantage to take a premature lead before the deciding fixture, with the game being pretty much 50-50 and impossible to predict beforehand, as Liverpool had lost just once at home all season, however had also won just once in their previous 7 league games. Liverpool would start the game the brighter side, with Inter's defence struggling to deal with the electric Fernando Torres. And after just 12 minutes, centre-half Marco Materazzi would be booked for clipping the Spaniard who had just beat him to the ball. And 18 minutes later, he'd be shown a 2nd yellow, after once again fouling Torres, leaving Inter with an absolute mountain to climb, aiming to at least stay level for an hour being a man down. But if there's anything a good Italian team knows how to do, it's defend. The Nerazzurri managed to find their feet near instantly after being reduced to 10, holding out until half-time with the score still 0-0. The second half would be a scrappy affair, with individual mistakes being the closest either team would be to scoring. Ibrahimovic found himself on the end of a poor clearance, aiming to set up Esteban Cambiasso, whose shot would end up falling well wide. Patrick Vieira would then be dispossessed by Lucas Leiva, with the ball eventually reaching Fernando Torres, who would see his shot saved by Julio Cesar. And as the game went on, Liverpool looked more and more uncomfortable with the scoreline, giving it all to travel to Italy with an advantage, and hoping to make the most of their extra man, eventually bringing on Peter Crouch and Jermaine Pennant to try and grab a goal. Come the 85th minute, very few big chances had been seen in the match, before a poor cross into the Inter box found itself flying over pretty much everyone, eventually landing at Dirk Kuyt on the edge of the area, whose shot would be deflected and beat Cesar in the Inter net. And then, having held out for so long, Inter would concede a second just 5 minutes later, with Steven Gerrard's last-minute strike doubling their lead and putting the Reds one huge step closer to the next round. Going into the second leg, Mancini said Inter would need a perfect night if they wanted to overcome their 2-0 defeat. And let's just say, their finishing the first half was far from matching the description needed. Inter would miss various chances in the first half, in which had they scored just one, they could have easily gone on to overturn their deficit by the end of the initial 45 alone. Ibra would cause Liverpool real problems. However, his strike partner Julio Cruz didn't have his shooting boots on, dragging an important opportunity well wide after half an hour. Come the 50th minute, and Inter would finally see a game-changing moment, but it wouldn't be in their favour. A suspended Materazzi's replacement, Nicolas Berdiso, would see a red card, and 14 minutes later, Torres would seal Liverpool's place in the quarter-finals. With so much pressure on this Champions League campaign, being knocked out in the last 16 could only be seen as a failure for the Nerazzurri. And after the game, Mancini stated in his press conference that the rest of the season would be his final 2.5 months in Milan, with his comments being seen as a heated reaction of a manager in the moment and were taken with a very large grain of salt. But despite going on to win the Scudetto for the 3rd year in a row, Mancini would stay true to his word to a certain extent, leaving Milan having been their most successful manager in decades after being sacked following a Coppa Italia final loss to Roma. This would start the inevitable search for a new manager, with President Massimo Moratti desperate to find the right man, somebody who could bring European glory back to Inter and had proved it before in the past. Obvious options like Ancelotti, Ferguson and Lippi were unavailable for various reasons, and so Moratti was left with one man who he felt was the perfect fit, the special one. Less than a year previously, Mourinho had left Chelsea in a shocking manner and had waited patiently for a role that would appease his desires. When the opportunity to take over the best side in Italy with an underperforming squad that he could revolutionise, there was no way the Portuguese 45-year-old could say no. Mourinho came into a squad made up of a mix of inexperienced or underperforming talent going into their prime, and ageing players who may only last another 1 or 2 years at the top level, and so in his first year, it was important to make the right signings and truly understand his squad. Mourinho brought in wingers Ricardo Quaresma from his ex-side Porto and Brazilian Mancini from Roma. Both players were expected to be starting wingers for at least his first season at the club, although funnily enough, Inter had tried to hijack AC Milan's signing of Ronaldinho earlier in the summer. Mourinho was desperate to bolster his midfield all summer, first going in for an ex-player of his, Frank Lampard, who was apparently left furious at Chelsea after being rejected a new contract, and then watching as new manager Luis Felipe Scolari pinpointed in his first interview that he would under no circumstances allow Lampard to leave. In the end, personal reasons had meant Lampard wasn't ready to leave England, and so Inter then went in for Marek Hamsik, who had just seen a breakthrough season for Napoli. However, the club's president De Laurentiis made it clear that Napoli would not be selling the 20-year-old. And so finally, Inter Milan went in for Sully Montari, who's more of a ball-winning and less of a goal-scoring and creative midfielder, and so there's clearly still a role Mourinho wanted to fill in his Inter side. Going into the actual season, Mourinho's first game would be a Supercoppa Italiana fixture against Roma. After 120 minutes, the score was 2-2, and Inter would go on to win 6-5 on penalties, with Mourinho winning silverware in his first game as manager. Fast forward to the league campaign, and after hitting top of the league in just 3 games, Inter would stay there for pretty much every week left in the season, winning the Scudetto for the 4th year on the bounce. However, as I mentioned earlier, Moratti wanted the Champions League, and that was a goal that Mourinho had been brought in specifically to accomplish. In the group stages, Inter drew fortunate opposition, but would massively underperform, finishing second to Panathinaikos on just 8 points, and were only 2 points off finishing last in the group. Mourinho had aimed to play a 4-3-3, as he had done at both Chelsea and Porto. However, it became clear fairly early on that it simply would not be possible with the personnel Jose had at his disposal in Italy. So then, he started to experiment, deciding on a 4-3-1-2 formation before their last 16 clash, where they would face tough opposition, who were none other than reigning champions, Manchester United. In the opening leg at the San Siro, it took brilliance from goalkeeper Julio Cesar to keep the tie goalless. And so going into an away match at the iconic Old Trafford, the odds were stacked against the Nerazzurri. I suppose it was unsurprising then when Cristiano Ronaldo and his teammates sealed their place in the quarterfinals with ease, winning 2-0 as the Interisti had to watch their side be knocked out in the last 16 for the 3rd year in a row. After failure in the Champions League, blame would of course in part be placed on the shoulders of Mourinho, but more so the players after underperforming in Europe with 2 separate managers, with Zlatan Ibrahimovic being singled out, having scored just a single goal in the entire European campaign. It may have been this blame which helped push Zlatan over the edge, as following the conclusion of the season and interest from Barcelona, it became clear the big Swede was going to leave. Focusing on this summer transfer window, and Inter put in work, with Mourinho making his targets clear to the board, stating what he believed he needed for the squad to succeed. Jose had spent the first year learning his squad, and quickly learned who could stay and who had to go. Nobody was safe from the axe with Mourinho at the helm, with the likes of Luis Figo, Julio Cruz, Hernan Crespo, Patrick Vieira, Mancini, Adriano, Maxwell, and even more being forced out over the season. As I mentioned earlier, it would also be time for Zlatan Ibrahimovic to leave in probably the most important aspect of this transfer window. At Barcelona, despite netting in the Champions League final and playing a significant role in winning the Blaugrana their first ever treble, Samuel Eto'o had clashed various times across the season with Pep Guardiola, and so the Catalan club offered Inter Milan around €70 million and Eto'o in exchange for the Swede. an offer Inter Milan simply could not refuse. The huge fee received for Eto'o allowed Inter to bring in real quality, whilst working on a net profit. In came Brazilian defender Lucio after an attempted move for Ricardo Carvalho fell through, as well as the likes of Brazilian midfielders Kerlon and Thiago Motta. But alongside Samuel Eto'o, 2 more players came in during the summer, making up arguably the 3 most important transfers in Inter Milan's recent history. With Inter needing another striker to replace Julio Cruz, they looked to Diego Milito from Genoa, who alongside Thiago Motta had helped the side to a 5th place finish in 2008-09. And the final name on this list is none other than Wesley Sneijder, who at 25 years of age had been allowed to leave Real Madrid, with the Spanish Giants in a rebuild of their own. After losing the Supercopa 2-1 to Lazio, and drawing the opening game of the season to newly promoted Bari, Sneijder made his debut on the 29th of August, helping Inter to a 4-0 win in the Milan derby, with the side finally starting to get going. 8 wins in their next 10 saw Inter go straight to the top of the league. However, in Europe it was a different story. Inter had drawn their opening 3 games, and going into the return fixture against Dynamo Kiev, the nerves were starting to get to Mourinho's men. From the literal first minute, Inter would be squandering chances, with poor finishing being a theme throughout the game. Chance after chance was missed by the Italian side, before their opponents got a foothold in the game. In the 21st minute, ex-AC Milan forward Shevchenko bagged the opener against his former manager, sending Inter to the bottom of the group. Come half-time, and change was needed, so Mourinho brought on Balotelli and Motta in what seems to be one of the earliest examples of Inter's unique 4-2-3-1 system, in which both wings were often occupied by traditional strikers who were technically gifted enough to add another dimension to their attack, whilst also being hungry enough to track back. However, come the 86th minute, the special one's gamble hadn't paid off, as they were still behind. But then, in just 3 minutes, Inter went from 1-0 down to 2-1 up, rising from the bottom of the group to the top of it, with Barcelona up next. 2 first-half goals would see Inter Milan off at the Camp Nou, and going into the final game of the group stage, it was a nerve-wracking affair for fans of the Nerazzurri, with Eto'o and Balotelli grabbing a goal each to secure qualification in 2nd place. Following the conclusion of the first half of the Champions League, Inter would drop points for the 2nd league game in a row against Atalanta, before scraping through the first round of the Coppa Italia 1-0 against bottom of the league Livorno. Fast forward to the next Coppa Italia game, Inter had got back into form in Serie A, and Goran Pandev was also brought back to the club in January, having left for Lazio 6 years previously, and was a perfect example of a Mourinho player who was willing to sacrifice individual goals and accolades for the better of the team. The signing of Pandev is what I think allowed the shell of a great team we saw in the first half of the campaign to reach its full potential, as in the next Coppa Italia game, Inter came from behind to beat the most informed team in Italy, Juventus, 2-1, with a last-minute match winner from Balotelli. Inter would then win the first leg of the Coppa Italia semi-finals 1-0 against Fiorentina, before their form dropped once again, winning just 2 of their 6 games before their last 16 Champions League clash. In case you needed reminding, Inter had been knocked out at this stage for the previous 3 seasons, and due to a subpar group stage performance yet again, they had to face the winners of Group D, which happened to be one of the favourites Chelsea, a clash made even more tasty given it was the first time Jose Mourinho had faced his ex-side since leaving 2.5 years prior. Inter would be hosts first, and made their home advantage count near instantaneously, opening the scoring in the 3rd minute through Milito. However, in the 51st minute, Kalou would equalise for Chelsea, but in a true Mourinho team's fashion, the Nerazzurri fought back to go ahead once again just 4 minutes later, taking a 1-goal lead to Stamford Bridge. Going into the second leg, it was clear it would always be a single goal to decide the game. If Inter scored first, they would sit back and defend their 2-goal cushion, and if Chelsea opened scoring, then they'd do the same in order to progress through on away goals. In the end, it would of course be Inter Milan to bag the only goal of the game, with a Samuel Eto'o strike in the 78th minute being enough to see them progress to the quarter-finals. In the quarters, they'd face a fortunate draw, dispatching an overachieving CSKA Moscow side 2-0 over both legs, reaching the semi-finals for the first time since 2003. However, it wasn't all sunshine and happiness for Inter, as the effort they had focused on their Champions League run had affected league performances, and come the 10th of April, just 4 days after the Champions League quarter-final success, they struggled against the Fiorentina side they had to play again 3 days later, drawing 2-2 and losing top spot to a resurgent Roma. They'd be able to see Fiorentina off in the upcoming clash with a second 1-0 semi-final win. However, they still had work to do, having to catch up to Roma in the league, as well as beat them in the cup final less than a month later, having lost to them just weeks previously in March. Inter managed to beat Juventus 2-0 in their next league fixture, before once again facing Barcelona in the Champions League, with a home first leg in the semi-finals. The thing is, Jose Mourinho had always had an interesting relationship with Barcelona. He'd been there before as a coach, and had been snubbed for their manager role various times throughout the years. So this semi-final clash was always going to be iconic. And then, to make this clash even more fiery, a volcano quite literally erupted, sending a huge ash cloud into the sky, and stopping all European air transport for weeks. This meant that Pep Guardiola and Barcelona had to travel to Milan by bus, taking them hours, and meant they wouldn't be fully rested for the tie ahead. Just 19 minutes into the first game, and Pedro put Barcelona ahead, with the Blaugrana mentally one huge step towards back-to-back Champions League finals. See, one thing to note about this Inter side is that no matter who they faced up against, they knew they could win the mental battle, with Mourinho instilling his iconic us against the world mindset into his players. Inter would see a remarkable number of red cards across the season, and would often go a goal down, but no matter what obstacle they faced, more often than not, they overcame it. And so, 11 minutes later, Wesley Sneijder equalised, before Maicon put the side ahead just after half-time. See, this was a typical Inter performance. They almost teased Barcelona, and in the end the Blaugrana players lost their heads, receiving over double the number of yellow cards that Inter did, and conceded yet again in the 61st minute to Diego Milito. Oh, and if you thought that sounded like an iconic Mourinho side's performance, take a look at his second leg. 27% possession, 15 fouls committed, 5 yellow cards and even 1 red card received, 7 fewer corners than Barcelona, just 54% passing accuracy, 20 shots for Barcelona compared to just 1 for Inter, and most importantly, 1 goal to Barcelona only. And so despite losing the game, Inter still went through to their first Champions League final since 1965, hoping to maintain their 100% record at that stage of the competition, in a game which gave us quite possibly the greatest and most iconic Jose Mourinho moment of all time, as after full time he went absolutely crazy, celebrating in front of the Barcelona fans on the lower tiers, whilst pointing to the Interisti watching from the skies. Oh yes, and how could I forget? Between these two fixtures, Inter had beaten Atalanta 3-1, as Roma lost to Sampdoria, putting Inter back on top of the league with just 3 games remaining. In the space of 8 days, Inter had gone from Champions League underdogs, who'd likely just bottled the league, to favourites for the title, and pretty much evens to win the Champions League, coming up against Bayern Munich in the final. Inter and Roma would both win their next league game, and are now facing each other in the Coppa Italia final. In a feisty affair, ex-Inter player Nicolas Berdisso would receive the first yellow of the game after just 14 minutes, having been sold by Mourinho in the summer. 25 minutes and another 2 yellow cards later, and Milito had put Inter ahead by the 88th minute, and they'd completely got in the heads of the Roma players, with Totti kicking out at Balotelli, getting himself sent off, and watching as Jose Mourinho and his Inter side lifted their first trophy of the season. 4 days later, and a 7-goal thriller went Inter's way, defeating Chievo Verona 4-3 in the league, before beating an already relegated Siena side 1-0 in the final game of the season, being crowned champions by just 2 points, having conceded only 34 goals all season. With 2 trophies ticked off, all eyes were on the Champions League final, as Inter aimed to be the first Italian side to ever win the treble, although Bayern Munich had the exact same ambition, with each side having matched their domestic success relatively. Now of course, you know what happened here. Milito ended Inter's long wait for European success, with 2 goals from the man who joined the club at the start of the season, at the age of 30, having never once played a Champions League fixture. And so, instead of covering the exact events of the match which you can view or find out about easily online, let me read you the words of a Nerazzurri banner which featured in the final. And now, together we crown the kingdom. Following the final, just as quickly as his Inter side had risen, they dispersed again. Days after the final, Mourinho would leave to join Real Madrid, and the core of players, which were pretty much all over 30, quickly deteriorated, with none being more iconic than Diego Milito. In just a couple years following the 2009-10 treble, Milito found himself back in Argentina, but no matter where he ended up afterwards, nobody could take away from him the fact that he was the man to score the winning goals in each of Inter's 3 trophy wins. It may be remembered as Mourinho's Inter these days, but nobody was more important to its success than Diego Alberto Milito. Thank you for watching, I hope you liked the video. Also take care and enjoy your new year. Please like, subscribe and comment if you did enjoy, but also follow all of my socials, link in description. There should be a poll for the next video I make on the community tab tomorrow, so keep your eyes peeled. But most importantly, thanks for watching and enjoy your day.